Okay, good afternoon. Oops, there we go. So we are finishing off Mishnah 16 today. This is from Rabban Gamliel, and Rabban Gamliel had told us also about appointing a teacher, which could be appointing a teacher itself, or having someone, of course, who would be your rabbi that would give you the things when you're not sure of something, and removing yourself from doubt. The last part of the Mishnah, it says "V'al be aser omados," which literally means don't increase to tithe by estimation. Don't when it comes to tithing, right? We know there's the law of taking what we call meiser, a tenth. This is not specific. I mean, it could be, but the law of meiser is not officially the law that we are familiar with, which is the 10% of your earnings of your income you give to tzedakah. That's sort of an outcome of that. The real main law was an agricultural law, which applied in Israel, and still rabbinically we are careful with this, that we would be 10% of the produce that is grown, you would have to separate, and some would go to the Levi, and then there were other things that would go to the Kohen called Truma, and had to be done in a way where you literally took off 10%. And until you did that, you couldn't eat any of the crop. And also other types of tithing of animals, every 10th animal, etc. So on the surface, it would sound like it's telling you don't estimate, and don't say, oh, you know what? Yeah, I'm just going to take off a bunch and add on to it. That's what it would seem to be on the surface. However, many of the commentators point out that if that's what it means, I don't need to have a Rabban Gamliel telling me that in this Mishnah, because that's a basic law in what you should do in the laws of Meiser. It doesn't belong here in Pirkei Avos. So some of the commentaries actually connected back to the first part of the Mishnah, which talked about aseh lecharav, making a teacher. So, for example, Rabbi Lau has an interesting way of saying, and he has a different interpretation of making a teacher, which is not just find a teacher. He says, make yourself into a teacher, make yourself into a Rav. So in other words, learn enough so that you can make decisions. So and not be in doubt, right? If you don't know what you're doing, then all the time you're going to be in doubt. And then you'll have to start saying, well, what should I do now? Learn, study, make sure that you know enough that you can make a decision and decide and know what to do in cases of doubt. And in that way, you won't be estimating, right? Your answer will be knowledgeable. It won't be just an estimate. Oh, I think this is a good idea. And then sometimes you may increase. And this goes back to something we mentioned the other day about when you're going to make a decision to be machmir, to be stringent in a certain way. That's easier because I don't have to think. I could just say, okay, I just won't do that, or we're not going to allow that, which sometimes for yourself is not such a big deal, but if you're making decisions for other people, then that could be very, very unfair and inappropriate in many cases, where you're making somebody not allowing someone to do something which they need to do because you don't know the law. Other takes on this is first of all, one of the problems is that when in the actual tithing situation, when someone tithes the wrong amount, so it makes the tithing no good, and therefore the part that they've taken off, if they've taken too much off, they're really not allowed. It's not legal, and therefore they're not allowed wouldn't be allowed to eat it, which becomes they won't know the difference. They'll end up eating something that they shouldn't be. If they're just estimating, sometimes when you estimate, you might take too little, which even though you might start to take off a lot, but in the end, in another case, you may take off too little, and then the whole thing doesn't work. The fruits that were supposed to be made edible because you took off the 10% weren't. So that's one angle. The Tiferes Yisrael takes it actually and says this is not talking about real tithing. It's an example, and the example is to teach you, as we've been saying, about being stringent in a case of a law, a particular situation. And he says what you should do is you should treat it the same as Meiser, the same way that when it comes to tithing, you're not allowed to be adding on. You can't be machmir. You can't be stringent by saying I'm going to do more. So too, when you're rendering a law, when you're rendering a judgment in law, whether it's for yourself or for others, sometimes, in many cases, being stringent can be problematic. Um, Another angle, a similar idea though, is that when it comes to halacha, there's we have very set rules. And when you start playing loosey with the rules, so then it kind of throws them all out, and you basically are just making up your own. You're making an estimate, and you no longer have that exactitude in terms of the halacha, which says it should be this thing should happen at this particular place at this particular time and this amount, right? There's that is what the law is teaching us, and when we are just making it very general, it's close enough, or it's not exact, but it probably more than I should have done anyway, so it's okay. Then you're not really being careful in your fulfillment of the mitzvah, and in that way you're not bringing to it the importance and the feeling that it should have. Another angle is Rabbeinu Yonah in terms of talking about making an analysis and in terms of how you think and analyzing things. Um, just like you shouldn't estimate, don't make assumptions. Don't when you have to analyze something, you have to analyze all the angles. There's a lot of different many situations are not simple, and sometimes you want to make a quick snap decision. Don't do that. You have to really look at obviously, someone who's in law is familiar with this idea, right? You got to look at all the angles of a case, and same thing with halachos, and especially ones which are not so black and white. When you have, which of course comes up all the time, whether it be in medical issues, life and death issues, etc. There are many different situations which are not black and white. What do you do in that situation? And you have to examine from all angles. One is we talked about the idea of stringency and versus being lenient. There's a famous story or case where there was some type of an epidemic where people were the health of the community was in danger, and I believe it was Reb Chaim Soloveitchik who ruled that the people should eat on Yom Kippur because it was because of this particular epidemic that was happening, and everyone's health was a dangerous situation. And he said, even though it's Yom Kippur, everyone should eat because otherwise it's going to be a problem. And there were some people who were upset, like how could you say you'd be so lenient? You're going to let people eat on Yom Kippur? And his response was, I'm not being lenient on Yom Kippur. I'm being stringent on pikuach nefesh. I'm being stringent with the health of the people, and therefore we have to do it. So there is a balance. I saw an interesting also it's a story of similar concept, which is that seems in the town of Kelm. There they used to have a situation where they had a store where people can buy things, and it was kind of on the honor system where because there was a yeshiva area, so people were busy learning. They didn't want people to give up the time to mind the store, so it was an honor system. They had a box and you put money in, and it turned out that when they opened the box, there was more money than there should have been. There was too much money in there because people had put extra money in. And the Alter of Kelm, he said, we can't do this. We are going to have to close the store because this is not acceptable. Because what means is that some people are putting in more money. Why are they putting in more money? Because they don't have enough. There's no change. If my bill was only for $16 and I have a $20 bill, what am I going to do? So people put in extra money. Says, so what's going to also happen then is that someone is going to come along and going to put in less money because they didn't have the right change. And the rationale that person will use is going to say, well, last time I overpaid, so now I can underpay. Big deal. I'm okay. And it doesn't work that way. When when you overpaid, you gave away the money. That's it, finished. Now it's a new story. So when you're underpaying, you're truly underpaying. So being sometimes estimating can lead to problems, and therefore this was an example of that. And so essentially we have to be very careful in how we make decisions, and it has to be with precision and not just by, well, I assume something and therefore it's close enough. And I'll even when I'm going to err on the side of caution, in many cases, it could come back to be a problem, and therefore the Mishnah is telling us don't do that when it comes to making decisions. And we will hold it there. Have a good day, everyone.